thought about it, I think, the night before, actually. Remember my take on Bugonia, how I said, such a beautiful film, because the vindication of the conspiracist doesn't take away that from the fact that he was crazy, but it finally creates a harmonic kind of cosmic resonance between his insanity and the real, right? The kid, right? But then I noticed something. I kept thinking about something. There's also a dark woke conclusion from Bugonia. The dark woke conclusion makes total fucking sense in terms of the intention of the director, where you have to concede to the conspiracists that they're right, because they are right. But it's dark woke to just be like, okay, you are right. And you know why? Here's why. Because your race is deformed and you're killing the planet and yada. And that maybe the film's idea is like, the intention is like, yeah, we are doing the Great Reset and we're going to kill everyone. And you know what? You deserve it. So that's kind of like the dark woke take. And I think Logo is correct that that was the intention of the director. I think so. The more that I think about it, the more I conclude, I think that was the director's intention. But how much does the intention of the director matter? Remember, the intention of the director of Joker was one thing, but then how it was objectively interpreted was totally different, right? So I agree with Logo that it was a dark woke intention by the director, for sure. But to me, how the movie made me feel was completely different than his intention. It made me sympathize with the crazy guy and his cousin. I of course I sympathize with them. They were poor, destitute. They represented, forgotten about types of populations here. They were neglected. They were done dirty. And it was the horror and the tragedy of their situation was just like, was so intense, of how like he was victimized by the truth, right? And to me, this is a much more powerful interpretation, although it's not what the director intended, I don't think. I think the director intended of Bugonia for the dark woke conclusion, which was very impotent and pathetic of them, because it's like, oh yeah, you know what? You're right, and it's based. And, people were talking about, well, what conclusion can we draw from the film that you could interpret it in the way you do and say that this is a MAGA communist film? And here's what I would say. Because it's like, well, in that case, the alien was right. Human beings were a genetic defect that makes them constantly prone to war and violence, and there's no way to fix them. You have to kill them. And what if that's the dark woke conclusion, right? And I'm like, the way I think about it, though, is that I think even if that is true, even if the film is implying, and it is, that this is true, what conclusion could we draw from that fact? That the aliens are right? And I think no. I think the truth is that the truth will set you free. I think that this film inadvertently and unintentionally leaves open the possibility that there's a nugget of hope in truth itself. That if mankind awakened to the truth about its origins and these aliens and stuff, maybe that would be a source of hope to unite humanity. Or maybe that would be a source of hope for humanity to reestablish a connection with the real and with the good. And that's my interpretation personally. Not the director's intention, but my interpretation. Because I think that we're presented with the notion that the various conflicts and violence in humanity's history is because of some genetic defect where only the most violent survived, right? And that they're just irredeemable. But there's two things I want to point out. One, clearly there's something wrong with the alien scientific paradigm, because their experiments did not work to reverse the genetic defect. Something about that didn't work. That's a crucial plot point to me for my interpretation. The second thing is that What if the senseless cycle of violence in mankind is a consequence of the fact that mankind doesn't know what matters because it doesn't have a connection to the real? It doesn't have a connection to truth. Isn't the message of Jesus that we will give humanity a chance by allowing the truth to set them free? Isn't there a kind of Christological hope in this schizophrenic of this film where it's like that glimmer of hope, however weak and pathetic and small that it was, is so powerful because now humanity has a chance to make meaningful its violent existence, at the very least. Meaning, even if we can't fix ourselves, at least now it's meaningful. Before we would not understand. We're so violent, we're caught in this endless cycle, we're so imperfect, but the dimension of meaning is gone. Now it's returned. The dimension of meaningfulness has returned. Oh, there is a reason for this. The aliens are at fault. That's why. That's why countless suffering and cycle of whatever, we're killing the planet, we're killing each other, whatever. The entire thing that makes sense of that is the aliens, right? So it's like now we have a chance to have a relationship to the real. And only out of this relationship is the good possible, is justice possible, is morality possible. What if humanity was caught in an endless trap, a cycle of violence, because it didn't know why? What if just knowing why is enough? The why in question being the meaning. And my interpretation of this entire thing is it's a general notion of conspiracism. Conspiracy theories asymptotically approximate a meaningfulness that binds together in a quilting point the reason for our reality. What's its meaningful symptom? And when the symptom is recognized, it becomes signifier. That's how the meaningfulness of reality is restored. And this intense space, small space of from symptom to signifier, I think Bugonia captures that in a really beautiful way. In this small, pathetic reality of the schizophrenic and his mentally disabled cousin, where there's such an intensity of truth that drives him crazy and makes him crazy precisely because it is the truth. It is actually real, right? And he doesn't know how to deal with it. There's a constant back and forth, an oscillation around this central truth, which is too much for him to handle for sure. But simultaneously, because it's the key to the whole world's troubles, all the fucking problems and tragedy and suffering in the world, this is the reason. How can one person bear that? So this is maybe how I interpret. Maybe that's why in the film, after she pops the bubble and kills everyone, we see all of these dead bodies around the world. We see the entire breadth of humanity dead, right? And to me, the way that made me feel, at least, how I interpreted that, again, I don't think it was the director's intention, but how I interpreted that was this was what was at stake. This poor guy was losing his mind because he was brought into direct proximity with the integral totality of all of mankind and its existential status. And remember what I told you about integrity and the integral whole of things. They're lighter than a feather. They're lighter than a feather. The whole weight of the world combined, it's lighter than a feather, right? So this is why I like Bugonia, and Logo doesn't like it, and he's right in his interpretation. He's absolutely right in terms of how he characterizes the director's intentions, I think he's right. But I think there's a way to see the film differently, in my opinion. Um, but Logo is an authority on these kind of things. So whenever he has a view that's different from mine, I will tend to give him the kind of benefit of the what do you call it? Like I'll tend to be like, okay, then maybe I'm actually wrong then, right? But in this case, I still like my interpretation. I still kind of I think maybe there's something there. But anyway.